My name is Chrissy Sprouse, and I am grateful to be serving as chair of the University Staff Advisory Committee this year. USAC is an advisory body to President Johnson and other university leadership comprised of members from across the university, medical center, and extended campuses. Our mission is to maintain an active and participatory line of communication with the university community and to provide a forum through which staff can raise, discuss, and make recommendations to support the university's mission. USAC leadership created a multi-year plan to help foster consistency in our vision and focus. Our mission will remain consistent, advocating on behalf of staff. This year, USAC is continuing our theme with preparing staff for change during this time of unprecedented organizational, procedural, budgetary, societal injustices, and leadership change by increasing our communication efforts via our monthly USAC newsletter, in addition to our social media accounts, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and providing forums such as today for staff to hear directly from leaders. For today's webinar, we will hear updates from the Task Force on Racism and Racial Inequities. In addition, questions were collected from the staff community and several themes will be addressed, such as advocacy and outreach for racial injustices, how to have these difficult and meaningful conversations, and addressing disparities among units. Please note, all attendee microphones are muted, cameras are turned off, and the chat feature has been disabled. The Q&A tool will be monitored throughout the webinar for follow-up questions. Please feel free to submit questions throughout today's webinar. Questions will be addressed towards the last several minutes of our time with the leaders. For any questions not addressed during our time, we will be sure to share these with the leaders for follow-up. For closed captioning, please select the CC icon found at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. This discussion will be recorded and posted to our USAC website. If you have any technical issues, please contact Lauren Gannon-Evans, Randall McKenzie, or Drew Miller. Dr. James Moore, Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer, will be moderating and facilitating today's discussion with our panelists, which include Dr. Bruce McPherson, Executive Vice President and Provost, Dr. Hal Paz, Executive Vice President and Chancellor for Health Affairs, Dr. Tom Gregoire, Dean of the College of Social Work, Susan Basso, Senior Vice President, Talent, Culture, and Human Resources, and Autumn Glover, Government Affairs and Community Relations Consultant. And at this time, I would like to turn today's discussion over to Dr. Moore.
Well, thank you, Chrissy. Thank you for coordinating this fabulous event. It's always a pleasure to be among our most distinguished leaders on campus who work tirelessly every day to create a great institution for all of us to work and pursue our education. I would be remiss if I didn't highlight to the group that first, we just want to give a shout out and major kudos for the staff, how they are able to keep our institution functioning at a very high level. And I do that on behalf of the whole entire university. And this is why we brought this panel together. So you know that you're very important to the entire university enterprise. And so we did not alter the questions, and as indicated, these questions came specifically from the staff community. So I'll start out with Dean Gregoire. If you would give us an overview of the Task Force on Racism and Racial Inequalities.
Thank you, James, and thank you for the invitation to be here, and thanks everybody for deciding lunchtime today that this was the best thing you could do with your time. We're really glad you're all here. So as James know, because we're almost roommates, our task force has been meeting every Friday for most of the semester. We're pleased to have President Johnson as a regular attendee and a strong supporter, and to have the support of Provost McFerrin and Chancellor Paz. That leadership's really important to us. Unless we want to convene another task force in 5 years, we'll need to create an expectation of deep inquiry and accountability among all of our leadership. Nobody in a leadership position in this university should be delegating the work of diversity. We'll do it all together. That doesn't mean we're all going to be experts, and it doesn't mean we're not going to be vulnerable sometimes, but it's something we'll do together. And I imagine that one of our recommendations that will come forward will be continued training for all leaders in the university, and an expectation of establishing goals to move their unit and the university forward. So we're, as you've seen our website, we're 15 members. We are 15 warriors. I mean, it's a mighty crew. We're coordinated by Sarah Childers, and James and I co-chair the group. In addition to meeting regularly, we have a number of subcommittees that are also meet regularly. In fact, Autumn and I were in one of those subcommittees just a little bit ago. A lot of our work is listening. We want to hear the perspectives of people. We want to hear the experiences of people. We launched a survey earlier this fall, which closed a couple of days ago. We have a few thousand responses, so we'll begin analyzing that data. We have other listening sessions and focus groups going forward. We invite regularly to our meeting HR and others. Susan's a member of our task force as well, just to listen to the experience. The focus is really on identifying policies and processes and practices, and we have a few other P's that contribute to inequities and differential outcomes for specific racial groups at the university. That might be reflected in hiring, retention, salary administration, or a host of practices that would cause our university to be experienced differently by different groups. At the same time, the university is full of examples of good work being done, and we think a big part of our job is to find that work, to capture it, and to amplify it. So that we're a busy group. We'll produce a report towards the end of this calendar year that will focus on a lot of recommendations and provide a lot of challenges for people to do the work. James, as you know, when we were recruited by Dr. Drake originally for this, we both said that we, who says no to the president? But one of the things we did ask was, or we both said independently, we wouldn't be interested in a task force that didn't have an expectation of action. And we know that we have a committee that feels the same way. The other thing I want to say about this, this committee will go away at one point, this task force, but there's no finish line in work on diversity. And it's important to really, diversity is not a problem to be solved. This isn't something we fix and go away. A better university, a more inclusive university is always reflecting on diversity and always reflecting on equity. So I don't want to leave any of us with a view that there's a time that this conversation stops. We'll always have to be thinking in that respect. So there's my update, James, and I'm sure we'll get questions as we go.
Thank you, Tom. Chancellor Paz, would you give us an overview of some of the work, the fabulous work you all doing at the Medical Center?
Well, thank you very much, James. And following Tom, it's evident there's just an enormous amount going on at The Ohio State University in diversity and inclusion. I just want to give you maybe just a quick summary of some of the things that are going on here to give a sense of the activities. So let me begin with first and foremost, Ohio State Wexner Medical Center was among the very first academic health centers in the nation to create and implement an anti-racism action plan to improve health equity. And the focus and the framework of what we're doing here is around health equity, because we think it's so incredibly important. I'm just enormously proud of the progress we continue to make as we work to push forward on an anti-racism movement here across the campus. We've assembled a diverse group of leaders to serve on the Anti-Racism Oversight Committee with representation from across the Med Center and the health science colleges. This committee is chaired by Dr. Nwando Oluwala, as well as Autumn Glover, who is here joining us here today, and I can see her on my screen. This group will guide our work to ensure diversity and inclusion are integrated in all aspects of our organization, particularly as an academic health center. We think that's incredibly important. So everything from education to training, community engagement and patient experience, to policy and advocacy, as well as employee engagement and communications. We can't have a healthy community if we don't have a workforce that is engaged in this work, experiences what we're talking about personally and individually, and then can communicate that and leverage that across this broad geographic region that the Wexner Medical Center serves. We've assembled 9 anti-racism action groups at the Med Center that will create and support strategic initiatives for implementation. We think that's very, very important. And we've selected a cross-section of more than 140 champions who are nominated to help drive these efforts based on their passion, their desire for change, and their willingness to provide input to move our organization forward. The ARAP, as we call it, proposes a framework focused on education, engagement, policies, and practices that can be used as a model by other health systems and organizations nationally to combat structural racism. There are well over 100 academic health centers that are part of universities like us across the nation. We believe we have a very important responsibility to provide this leadership, not only in the communities we serve, but quite frankly, also at the national level. The work defines and introduces actions to create an anti-racism movement within our organization and across these communities. Our anti-racism action plan builds on a number of community programs that have already existed at the Wexner Medical Center for many, many years and takes it to the next level. And Autumn will have an opportunity, I'm sure, to talk to you about the work that is going on across this broad geographic region that has been spearheaded by the Ohio State Wexner Medical Center on the Near East Side across 8 different communities that are disadvantaged, largely Black, where there is early infant mortality that is disproportionate to the other communities, where we've seen experiences like life expectancy being diminished by, on average, 18.3 years between the Near East Side and Bexley, a community that sits literally 1 mile apart, one predominantly white, the other predominantly African American and Black. What are the things that we can do as an institution, as a university, and as an organization, health science organization, to have an impact on health and well-being, but also ensuring that the communities we serve are able to have a life expectancy that is on par with all the communities that we serve? That is so exceptionally important. And when you hear about staggering statistics like an 18.3-year difference, it really creates an understanding of an important aspect of how we look at this, that racism is a social determinant of health. And we must, and have a responsibility to, take action to address this, because if we don't, many, many people, particularly people of color, will be left behind. And that is just unacceptable. So this work begins with our own organization and then works outwards from there. So Tom before mentioned P's, I'll mention E's. As an organization, we must elevate our community to creating a diverse and inclusive organization at all levels. As a healthcare leader, we must engage and equip our faculty, staff, students, and other learners, patients, and communities with opportunities to learn about and the tools to participate in anti-racism actions. As an academic health center with a commitment to the communities we serve, it is imperative that we empower our clinicians, our faculty, students, and staff to address racism, poverty, and other social determinants of health wherever possible. And then last but not least, we must elevate and review our efforts regularly. And I feel particularly it's important to not only make the investments, but to be transparent and public about what we expect to achieve, and then to report those results out to the communities we serve so that they can hold us accountable to, in fact, achieving this vision and this mission that we've described through our activities, our anti-racism activities. And as we look within ourselves across the medical center and our health science colleges, continuously figure out how we can do a better job. I'll just wrap up with just a couple of points to give you a sense of where we're starting so that there's a clear sense of the opportunities we have before us. As I said earlier, perhaps, if not the first, one of the first to declare racism as a social determinant of health. We think that's a very, very important point that requires additional focus because of the disparities I mentioned a few minutes ago, and that we have to take steps to immediately address, fund, and support these areas strategically to reduce the long-term impact of social determinants of health on at-risk communities. So we launched a 21-day anti-racism challenge. It's available for everyone to participate in on the web. We kicked off a series of programs called ROAR, Roundtable on Actions Against Racism, for all audiences, and the first was held in October. And we've continued our longstanding implicit bias training throughout the organization, which has greatly diversified the Med Center and our College of Medicine in a number of different ways. And I'll give you a few quick examples and then I'll wrap up. US News and World Report ranks OSU's Medical College as number 2 in the nation for African-American med students outside of the 4 historical Black medical colleges in this country. 24% of our incoming class is from underrepresented backgrounds in medicine, and 22% of our College of Medicine leaders are women. We were recently ranked by Forbes as the number 4 of America's best employers in diversity. That's not universities, that's not hospitals, that's number 4 in the nation. Number 1 was Procter & Gamble, number 2 was Henry Ford, number 3 was the global software company SAP. Ohio State Wexner Medical Center was 4th in diversity. We think that's an important starting point for these efforts, but we also believe it creates an enormous responsibility for us to continue to move forward. Quite frankly, as an academic health center and health science colleges, if we don't do it, who will? So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chancellor Paz. Let's pivot to Provost McPherson. How do we hold our academic leaders accountable to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, thanks, James, and appreciate the opportunity to join all of you, have terrific conversations with USAC leadership, but it's special to be able to focus on a topic of discussion and really connect with staff across this university. I'd echo what some of the previous folks have said, that as I pointed out to our academic folks, this is day 2 of week 14 of a fall semester that many find pretty astonishing that we're this far into the semester as an organization of this scope and scale. And sure, there was great planning and there's been really impressive execution of a lot of things, but the real answer to this is that it's our community that's actually agreed this is important. We're going to do these things to keep one another safe, to keep one another healthy, because we believe in the mission of this place. I raise that both to say thank you to the people that have joined us this afternoon, but also to acknowledge the parallel with the topic of the day. I think Tom said this at the start, under no circumstances, and the task force I think has reiterated this very early, do we dare think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as being the responsibility of an individual. We all have a shared responsibility that builds from a shared commitment to make strides, to be successful. Hal just laid out several things that they're doing that are tangible, and I love the notion of the accountability, of the transparency to say, here's what we say we're going to do, hold us accountable. We're showing you the data on how we're progressing. And as we move forward with our task force, I think we all hope that we reach that same point with so many other elements of what we're doing. As a university, of course, we're structured around our academic colleges and our campuses. 4 years ago, we actually started an annual program for all of the academic leaders on campus to go away for a day and talk about the scholarship of leadership. And so we've tried to think about topics that are not necessarily aligned with the discipline that made you successful in your journey through the university, but rather focus on the shared objectives we have as leaders within that environment. And from the very first session, our focus has been and remains on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think a culture has emerged out of that, of understanding this is an area where we're not, as Tom said at the start, at the end of a journey. In fact, realizing that there is no end to this journey is perhaps one of the single most important outcomes of engaging in this conversation. James, to the point of the question that was raised, this is one of our annual points of conversation and accountability with the deans. We have had the colleges and the campuses go through diversity action plans. We have a portal that Dr. Moore's office actually administers with the goal of being able to share best practices and the way that those best practices are actually playing out, so that none of us have a monopoly on the best ideas for how to move this forward. And with the diversity of disciplines across the university this comprehensive, there are lots of different best pathways to achieving success. And so it is a regular conversation. It is an annual accountability of those deans to be able to talk about what it is our goals have been, what we have done toward those goals, and as Tom pointed out, what our next steps are going to be, because there always will be next steps. Really critical to acknowledge, James, that we have the responsibility as leaders with titles, but we're all leaders at some level. It's the personal perspective we bring, and as we choose to make this an important cause in creating a better community, each of us takes on a bit of that responsibility. Each of us has the right to call ourselves a leader in the space where we find passion. And so I think it's important to acknowledge to our audience today that our academic leaders are discussing this on a regular basis and asked to document the successes that they're having, the challenges that they're facing, and the latter particularly with an eye toward sharing what some of those best ideas might be. But it's also important for each of us to realize just how critical it is that we accept the responsibility for our little corner of our community and making that better every single day.
James, you're muted, James.
Thank you, Provost McPherson. We're going to pivot to Susan. As the Chief Human Resource Officer, how can or will Ohio State hold managers accountable for preventing racism and or microaggressions in the hiring, promotion, and daily work process?
Thank you, James, for the question. And I too want to echo thanks to the University Staff Advisory Council for facilitating this incredibly important conversation. So thank you all so much for spending time with us. For my answer to this question, I'm just going to piggyback a little bit on what the provost said, because it's not that dissimilar in terms of how we hold managers accountable. I like to start by thinking about, to Dr. McPheron's point about what is our own little piece of this and what's our personal accountability. And so, I like to think about, what are the kind of accountability questions that as leaders, we can be asking ourselves every day. And so, for myself, I personally like to ask, what do I consistently do to affirm my commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion? Does the composition of my team reflect that commitment? What would my employees of color say about my commitment? And how do I contribute or undermine the advancement of our institutional diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts? And so I like to start from that place. And then when I think about, what are the things that we can do to hold managers accountable? I think there's a lot we can do. I think, we need to include diversity, equity, and inclusion goals in our year-over-year performance evaluation process. I think we should include the managers' teams in the evaluation process. I think we need to do a much better job of reporting diversity, equity, and inclusion performance on a regular, possibly quarterly basis. I think in this effort, data is incredibly important. We need to be transparent about it. And frankly, I look at our data a lot, and it's not impressive at all. And we can't fix what we don't acknowledge. And so making that data transparent is incredibly important. I think to Dr. McPheron's point, we need to require managers to develop improvement plans, goals in these areas. And we need to do a better job of helping them understand how really serious we are and what consequences there might be if they fail to meet our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals as an institution.
Autumn, good to see you and congratulations on being featured in Columbus Monthly. How can we create safe spaces where people can be vulnerable and share ways they challenge racist thoughts and practices?
So I say this and again, for the USAC folks, I'm a staff person. So all of these people, certainly hold them accountable, but I'm one of you. I'm just kidding. But I really want to note that I'm a staff person. And so I'm living this experience with all of you as well. And so as I think about kind of creating safe spaces, one of the very simple things we can all do is think about the tables that we're at, virtually and in person when we're safe to do that again. But if you look around the table and there's a point of view or a voice that's not there, be the one to step up and invite them to the conversation. We've had a lot of great activity and discussion this year in 2020. So as difficult as this year has been, it's also been a beautiful experience for me and certainly for all of you to see the ways that you're already stepping up. Our College of Medicine staff have created a book club. So I think that's an excellent opportunity to connect with your team, but go deeper. It's more than Cultural Heritage Days. It's introducing books by authors who are people of color, who are Black people, bringing in guest speakers and really evaluating the way that we do things and how we might layer them differently. I think the most important way that we have to create a more inclusive culture is not just in the statements. It's not ignoring when something harmful is happening. Dr. Olaiwola and I have been co-chairing the Medical Center's Anti-Racism Action Plan work since June. So we're at a 6-month time frame, and on a nearly daily basis, we get emails from staff who talk about experiences that they're having. And so, I'll quote Dean Gregoire, who I've done a lot of quoting of him here lately, but he said in one of the conversations that you hosted, Dr. Moore, that there are no bystanders in this work. And so I really do believe that and think about that in our daily practice. The change that we will see, as Dr. McPheron said as well, is just every day. It's every day in our personal and our professional practices and how we're interacting with each other. Don't overthink it, right? And so a lot of times people will send us a note and say, what could I be doing? And certainly there are some urgent opportunities and ways that people both internal to our institution but external are hurting. But it is also that daily interaction with your peers and your colleagues and welcoming more people to the table. I think it's just really important. And it's not about shaming people. We're all learning. So even as a Black woman, I went through the same K-12 education experience as everyone else. And so the 1619 project certainly wasn't in my textbooks either. And so just really come at it from a perspective of sincere I think humility and openness, but really, in your everyday opportunities. I think the other thing too is be supportive of your staff who may be one of just a few. Support them in wanting to be engaged in affinity groups and stretching their own leadership. So those are just some ways, but I think if I could say anything, I think one thing is this is all of our work. So it's not just this task force, it's not just those who have engaged in the anti-racism action plan, but every single one of us have a role to play here, and it may be different. And so lean into whatever that is for you, whether it's just being the one to make sure there's diverse voices at the table. That's incredibly important too.
Tom, there's so many people who want to make a difference. They want to be an ally. Tell me, what are ways, what is the best way to advocate for racial justice as a white person?
I appreciate that question. That's a good question. It comes up a lot. Autumn gave us the first step, which was to lean into this. Don't be a bystander. It's part of my privilege that I could be. I didn't have to. My friends of color had a different experience raising their children than I did, and I could go on with that. But so lean into this. It's okay if you're afraid. It's okay if you don't know. That's actually not a problem at all. Do a lot of listening. As my wife would tell you if she was here, I think I can solve any problem. And she'll occasionally tell me, you could just listen now and not try to fix it. Quit being a boy. Just listen, be curious, read, and think critically. We're just being besieged with information. Ideology and evidence are different things, and you thinking critically and unpack those things. So many of the arguments we have in any direction are not based, in fact, in evidence. Listen to stories of people of color. In 2014 at our college, and we like to think we're pretty enlightened or woke or whatever the flavor of the day is, but in 2014 we invited about 25 people, maybe it was 30, in our community, and we sat in a circle for about 2 hours, and many of these were staff and faculty of color, and we just listened, and we listened to their stories. And I listened to a staff member with a master's degree and a nice car in a nice neighborhood, and how he's been followed through his neighborhood by law enforcement. I listened to, I had to raise 2 boys and teach them not to do stupid stuff. It never crossed my mind to have to teach them some of the things a mother of color had to teach her children about how to be safe and engaging with law enforcement and some of that work. So I think that's a big part of too, but don't rush to fix as much as rush to listen. And when I listen to those stories, and when you listen to those stories, then you let this become personal. And I think that's important too. Most of us in that meeting in 2014 cried. And it's okay if your heart breaks here, because some of the experiences of people are just heartbreaking. So allow this work to become personal. Find somebody you can trust to ask that question you're afraid to ask. And just introduce it that way. I mean, don't drink anybody's Kool-Aid in any direction. Let's just ask hard questions of people we can trust, and learn in that respect. So those are my general thoughts. Don't let your fear tell you what to do. It's okay if you're frightened. It's okay if you don't have courage. Let your heart break. Let this be personal, but think critically. Don't ideology is not evidence. So that's a broad macro to micro experience, but that's mine. Lean into it, as Autumn says. Step into this work and ask people, how are you, and how can I help you?
Susan, there are a lot of staff across the enterprise that are pretty frustrated. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't highlight to the group that the task force has taken a deep dive looking at disparities between groups around salaries. This specific question, and I want to make sure I don't mess it up, because I know it's the question that I constantly receive in my role. And I know Tom he's received it constantly. I don't think you can be a leader on this campus without having questions around salaries. And this question is, will Career Roadmap and HR prioritize equalizing compensation gaps that clearly exist between gender and race? And also they want to know, if so, what will be the time frame?
Great, thanks, James. I love it that career roadmap comes up in every single discussion. It means people are really paying attention to the work, and I appreciate that. It is really important work, and the answer to the question is yes, it will address inequities. The frustration that staff and others are feeling about pay inequity is very real. And the data bears it out. And I've been incredibly transparent with all of our data. And I know my colleagues, Autumn, Dean Gregoire, and Dr. Moore on the task force have seen the data. And there definitely are challenges. And we need to commit as an institution to fixing it. And that transparency is very much a first step. What Career Roadmap does for us for the first time is build some rigor on the university side around our salary administration and our compensation structure, which quite frankly has been a bit of the wild, wild west. This is going to be the first time as an institution that we will have a consistent framework and a salary administration program that allows us to ensure that we are comparing like jobs. And that's, incredibly important when we're doing this equity work. One of the things for sure is that the Career Roadmap Initiative is going to shine a pretty significant spotlight on where the challenges are. One thing though that I would like to kind of highlight and call out, and I found this fascinating in my work over many, many years, is people often talk about pay equity like it's an event. And it is not an event. It is something that needs to exist and live within the culture of the institution and be something that's analyzed all the time. And this is going to be the opportunity that we will have when we do have the good fortune to implement this initiative, that we will be able to put that rigor into that work on a very regular basis.
Thank you. Harold, Tom and I receive a lot of communications from within the university and outside of the university. And there's a lot of language that we use that is not as common, structural racism, people using other terms like anti-racism. And for some people, it just really, they struggle with it. And so this is the specific question from one of our staff across campus. What change, if any, might we expect if, instead of using the phrase anti-racism, we operationally define our shared Ohio State ideals? 1. 2, could we then apply interventions such as organizational development procedures toward those ideas?
Yeah, so James, that's a great question. Thank you. I would say this. So first and foremost, Ohio State should include anti-racism among its operational definition of shared ideals. I think that's really important. Anti-racism is not the same as not racist. It just isn't. Rather than simply avoiding acts that may be viewed as racist, anti-racism means that we are actively identifying and we're challenging racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and as you heard, practices. And we're changing attitudes so that we can redistribute power in an equitable manner. That's really what we're referring to here. We're referring to structures, not individuals, but to change structures, we do have to change the minds of each individual at a time. the state of Ohio, the city of Cleveland, San Bernardino County in California, and other jurisdictions in the country are all at some stage of formally declaring racism a public health issue in their regions. Seeing racism in this light, frankly, rather than as some nebulous social issue, as my friend and colleague, George Benjamin, who's the president of the American Public Health Association, says, gives some substance and as a way forward for us. And I think that's really, really important. How do we move the conversation? How are we not continuing to spin our wheels? We have to move forward. If there is, I mean, if we've learned anything these past several months, we have to stop talking and we have to make progress. We have to move forward. And it's only by addressing these issues structurally and organizationally will that happen. We have to start by looking inward, looking within ourselves and asking what we can do as individuals to create a lasting, meaningful change. And then we can take the first real steps as organizations and as segments of society to make that change permanent and long lasting. And finally, I would say this, all of us as leaders have this responsibility. We have it as human beings, we have it as parents of children, we have it as members of our community. But as leaders, we have to recognize the fact that the demographics of this nation is changing, and it's changing remarkably. Don't we have a responsibility to make sure that the social structures within this nation reflect and celebrate and support that diversity, so this nation can be as strong as it possibly can be, and it truly can be a land of opportunity for everyone, no matter what their color. If leaders don't do this, quite frankly, who will?
Thank you. Thank you. Bruce, this is a question that comes from one of the staff across campus. They said, with our board of trustees and other leaders being predominantly mostly white and male, what hope do we have that actual change at Ohio State will occur?
James, I am the eternal optimist. I wake up every morning with hope, but it's hope that is pragmatically tinged by the fact that, we start from our starting place. I think we have to acknowledge what our starting point is. That does not mean that we accept where we are as the end point. I want to reflect back on something Autumn said. She used the notion that this is a place where we learn. This is a place where we learn. We create the future through new knowledge, but we make sure that we change the culture through learning from that knowledge. If this is not a place where everyone feels they can wake up in the morning and feel they have something to learn, you're working in the wrong place. This is a place that is built on the capacity to learn. When I look at what is, I don't assign blame for that starting point, for that baseline. I simply feel we have to tackle it as, what can we put in place? What actions can we take that are the results of conversations? I think that's a critical thing. You, James, you and Tom talked about the listening that you're doing, and it's so critically important. But if we don't get to actions from talking, then we will have failed. We will have missed the opportunity of a lifetime to make a difference. And I think we need to look at our current state of leadership from that perspective. Hal just said it perfectly. We each have responsibilities as individuals as well. A number of leaders on this campus 6 years ago made a commitment to start learning about implicit bias and the things that we don't know. And we brought that back to the campus, and it continues today. You asked a question earlier to Tom about how people can be allies. We have a formal program that has grown from that discussion. through the Women's Place that focuses on advocates and allies. Each of these things are small steps, but they're critically important steps. And to Hal's point, I don't want to overlook the implications of each of us exploring ourselves. You can point to us as leaders and hold us accountable, and you should. And we also need to look at ourselves and examine our own personal accountability. I went through that implicit bias training very, very early on in my tenure here at Ohio State. And I'll share with this group, my family is multiracial. And I learned a lot through that experience about how to think about the university that I'm helping to lead. But the biggest lessons for me were the lessons I learned about me and my daughter and the things I never understood about the life she was living. I spent decades being the best possible father that I could be. And to actually have to stop and think about the things I never understood, the things that I never did. It was sobering, and it still is sobering. And each of us has those experiences at some level. Every single one of us has some version of these experiences and sense of emotion and sense of passion that we can draw from. And if we commit to bringing that individual perspective to what we do together as a community, we in fact will make this an amazing place. But we have to put our hands together and we have to say, that's our commitment. That's what we're going to do. It's important for us as individuals, but the mission of this place to actually change the culture, not just of the Ohio State University, not just of Columbus, but Ohio, the nation, the world, that is such just a profound opportunity for us that we have to bring that individual passion, those individual experiences with us every day. And we have to make sure that we're looking around to the right, to the left, in front, behind, and we're saying, how do we commit folks to being a better place? It is those individual actions. It's having an institutional perspective. I would tell you, whatever this board looks like, whatever this administration looks like, we are united in saying we need to be better. We need to be the university that our state needs, that our nation needs, that our world needs for the future as the people around us change. It's the reason that we're committed to a general education curriculum where every single Ohio State student will have an opportunity to learn about, but more importantly, to talk about and act upon citizenship for a just and diverse world. We're doing these steps to build this into the way that Ohio State behaves as an organization. And so, I know we will change through time. We've changed through time. But looking forward, we will continue to change. And the board will change, the leadership will change. This is not somebody else's job, though, folks. It's our job right now. And so whatever I look like, it is my job to be part of finding what is next for this institution. So let's acknowledge our starting point, but let's absolutely agree that that's not the destination.
Thank you. Autumn, what are ways in which people can be involved with making positive change, and where do they go to find out what all the different opportunities available to them to be involved?
Sure. I think Dean Gregoire and Dr. Paz mentioned some of these earlier, but I want to underscore them. One, the University Task Force did put out a call for input, and that closed on Monday, but it's only because we're moving forward with other opportunities. So there will be a series of focus groups that actually launch this week that people can sign up for and participate in. And I know that that may not feel like a comfortable place to come, but please know that the task force gave a lot of thought to structuring them to be safe spaces. These personal experiences and sharing your perspective is so important to this work. We did receive thousands of responses to that input, but those personal stories and idea sharing in the focus groups, I think, will be incredibly important. The next opportunity that will come after the focus group are also a series of forums. We want the staff and our faculty and all of our learners to reflect on the work that the task force is putting forward. We're a group of well-meaning and well-connected folks who really care about Ohio State and its community, but it's through response to the work that we're doing that I think we'll continue to refine. So be that sandpaper, really help us in really shaping what's meaningful as it pertains to the anti-racism action plan. And even across our institution, Dr. Paz mentioned that we have over 100 people, just about 160 engaged in these action groups who are sharing their time and their talent and thinking through what are the best ideas, what would make this a better place for them. And so certainly folks who are part of our health system and our health sciences colleges, and even others, you're welcome. We do have members in our education and training group, for example, who aren't a part of the health sciences because of their expertise. So if you're interested in that level of work, I think join in and send me an email personally if you're interested in those action groups. We also launched through our Diversity Council, a part of this work, a 21-day anti-racism challenge. And that information is up on the Medical Center's anti-racism action plan page right at the beginning. It's a big circle or square that says 21-day. I think that's that personal practice. So while there are these structured opportunities, I think the best ways to engage is to make this both your personal and professional practice, and really thinking and challenging yourself to learn some new things. I mean, I said earlier, and not being facetious, that this is new. We haven't taught about these things and these experiences, and racism is everywhere. So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I say this often to folks, he wrote an op-ed at the beginning of the summer that said racism is like dust in the air and it's choking us. And so everything is literally that serious. Every single policy and practice, even the people you choose to engage with on projects and teams. I would be remiss to say and not underscore something Dr. Paz said, in that we're really building on work that we were doing as an institution. So prior to 2020, we could put out a diversity report and say, look at who we're recruiting and look at these employee resource groups. And those are certainly a strong foundation. So if you're not engaged in an affinity group, start one or join one. That is an opportunity for increased belonging and connection with your colleagues. But we're starting from a foundation, but really be okay with saying we're doing some things and we're doing them well. It's not to say that we're failing as an institution, but what else could we be doing? Because if those were the answers, people wouldn't still be hurting that we've heard. So,
Tom, this is a specific question, and you've been in meetings that you've heard similar questions that we've been in. What role do you think the Department of African American and African Studies playing in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion at Ohio State University?
So I must say, I promise I didn't write that question, but I met with that the interim chair 2 weeks ago when he reached out to me, both in my role as dean at the college and on behalf of the task force. That program should have a very significant role. They're doing a lot of good work in the classroom, in the community. So much of what we're going to be doing here is learning together as a community. We have real experts in African and African American studies. My conversation with the interim chair focused on both what could we do as a college and other colleges with that unit in the community, and then also what could we build curricular wise, a minor, a specialization, that where more students could learn in that regard. So I think that unit, and really you could ask me that question about all of them, but I love the timing of that one because literally the chair reached out to me and we had a good chat, and now he's working with some of our associate deans on actually carrying that forward.
Thank you. This is an open-ended question. Anyone can respond to it. Implicit bias training has emerged as one of the issues, one of the topics that we discussed today. It's ongoing. It's an ongoing topic. This question came from the audience, and it's more real time, more current. Says, does the board have to take implicit bias training? And if not, do you think they should?
Well, I'll certainly open the conversation. I'm not aware, James, that they have made that part of their practices. I know that in the recent presidential search, we recommended that. None of us were actually directly involved in that search, so I'm afraid in real time I can't report back what the outcome was. But I think as you and others know, we actually started the implicit bias training for faculty search committees that were focused on the discovery theme hires. And it quickly became something that spread very broadly across the university. And now most of our colleges, at least for faculty searches, are expecting their search committees to either go through that or even take a refresher course, because as you say, James, it's an ongoing thing. It should never slip from front of mind. And I know that certainly with leadership searches, we absolutely make sure that people are refreshed here. Susan may have something to say about the staff hiring process on that. But to your point about the board, I don't know that I can say that they have made that a regular part of their cadence of either onboarding or annual updates. They do a number of different updates, just not aware that that's one of them.
My own personal opinion is that the training is exceptionally important, but particularly when it's attached to a goal or an outcome. So Bruce mentioned search. When we launched the search for the Dean of the College of Medicine, we used implicit bias training as an important part of launching that search. But at the same time, we had an incredibly diverse search committee. More than half the members were women. Over a third were members of underrepresented minority groups from across the university. So you take that diverse group, you do implicit bias training, and then you say, the goal here, the charge is to identify the best and most diverse candidates we can possibly find for this search. And then you've really aligned the training with the process, with the outcomes. And I think that's really, really important. Putting people through training without having it clearly aligned with the goals we're seeking to achieve is a missed opportunity. But having them work together hand in hand, I think is a very, very powerful tool and very important. And I do think it starts with diversity of whatever groups we're talking about. That's an important part of this as well.
Yeah, if I could, Dr. Moore, just piggyback on what Dr. Paz said, I could not agree more that training absolutely needs to be tied to an outcome because I think it is something, especially in this D&I work, training always seems to be what we look to be the kind of panacea to help solve the problem. And one of the drawbacks to training, and this is just my professional opinion, is that as humans, we tend to forget new information after we learn it if we don't regularly apply it. And if the information we learn does not reinforce what we already know, we tend to forget it even faster. So for diversity and inclusion work, this means that people who do not believe they have biases to begin with will not necessarily remember the content that's presented to them during any training on unconscious bias. So I do think that what's emerging now, which I find fascinating, are some really interesting evidence-based alternatives where we can really help employees start to think and form new habits that kind of reprogram their intuition, and it's through exposure, enhanced familiarity, and kind of formation of new habits. And I think institutions and organizations that are looking to that kind of new way of helping employees think about these things are going to have greater success. Because if training worked, we'd be in a much better place right now.
Susan, well, panelists, I realize much of this discussion has focused on, racial disparities, racial inequalities. We have one question from the audiences in regards to the LGBTQ plus community. There's a body of knowledge, as you probably know, that non-members tend to make more money than those who are members of the community. And so here's an individual that seems to be, based on the information provided, highly credentialed, but seemingly does not have a career pathway, a career roadmap. Can you talk a little bit about that, Susan, about the change in the HR, how individuals like this person who seemingly, based on the information, is highly credentialed, 15 years work experience, 2 master's degrees, but just seemingly stuck. What will be the solution for individuals like this person?
Yeah, so, it's a great question. And, we often hear this in human resources, employees often don't know how to talk about these things with their supervisor. How can we help even our HR professionals help employees have these, meaningful conversations, whether it's about, how their career growth, their pay, their concern about their pay, I think is, probably a great first step. And, we need to invest, and I need to invest more time, particularly now that our HR service delivery model has been redesigned, and HR professionals will have capacity to really think more strategically and partner with leaders and employees, to be able to have, these conversations. So my first piece of advice would be to suggest that, the individual reach out to, their HR business partner. I would also say, I know we had a kind of an open-ended question, about employee resource groups, and we've talked a little bit about them already. But, the question was, are these groups, do we view, or do some people view these groups as being divisive? And I would say very strongly, no, they are not divisive. In fact, affinity groups and their engagement and our engagement with them is critically and important. And I would think for an individual, this individual that asked this question, an affinity group could be incredibly important. And there's a lot of ways that affinity groups can kind of enhance and support work and our work actually as leaders. We can partner with them as a pipeline for diversity. We can invite them to offer insight into, what the climate is like for them. We can ask their feedback on our diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. Are we thinking about all the various groups? We can turn to them for advice, and we could see them as recruiting champions. I think what often plagues these groups, however, is they often form very haphazardly. They often emerge with no resources. Many ERGs that I'm affiliated with, and I meet with many, tell me that leaders are just not engaged with them. So they want more leadership engagement, and they're not often included when we're establishing our diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas. So I think, for someone, for the individual that just asked this question, I think both, partnership with their human resources business partner and alignment with a particular ERG could prove to be very beneficial.
Tom, I know everything except the kitchen sink is thrown at the task force. How is the task force reviewing policies and practices that are discriminatory, i.e. hiring, promotion, and retention?
I'm sure, I'll bet there's a kitchen sink in there somewhere too, James, but I think we're reviewing them. Well, I don't think we're reviewing them by looking at the consequences of discriminatory practices. So we're looking at what do we look like as a when we're hiring? What do our search pools look like? What are the compositions of our faculty and staff? What are the data tell us about retention based on race? What do the data tell us about salary based on race? And so you can't actually have much of an argument with that. That's real data, real numbers. So that's how we're exploring that, James, is looking at the consequences for real people of this practices that, as I think Dr. Paz said, moving away from any individual's particular decision making. What does the system produce in terms of differences for people based on their race, their gender, their sex, their sexual orientation? So that's we're looking at consequences, which are nice measurable data.
Harold, do you have any insights on how the anti-racism plan that is outlined in the medical center, what's been their approach in this area?
In which area specifically, Jim?
Specifically on how are you, let me come back here. I'm sorry. What has been the process of reviewing policies and practices around discriminatory practices?
Yeah, and so we're very fortunate to have an outstanding team in human resources that works across the leadership to look at our policies and our practices at the medical center, and to do it broadly to ensure that we are not putting a process in place that's discriminatory, but also to make sure that the things that we're doing are state of the art in terms of the best knowledge that we have available to us, looking at our peers and understanding what our peers are doing. First of all, we have a responsibility to do that for our workforce. But second of all, as you all know, healthcare is a very, very, very competitive business. And we are only as successful as our workforce, our clinicians, our employees across the entire institution. We have about 27,000 people that are in some way assigned to the Wexner Medical Center. And we're competing with some pretty phenomenal places, not only in Columbus, but across Ohio and across the country. We are only as good as our talent, and our talent is very diverse. If we don't have state-of-the-art programs and policies here, we're going to lose this talent. And if we lose this talent, we lose in terms of being successful. So that is, if there is no other reason, there are a lot of really important reasons to be doing this. And I mentioned a whole list of them before, but I'll give you one more, which is our ability to get the job done, particularly as everybody is looking. I mean, look at what's going on during this pandemic. Everyone is looking to hire a nurse. If we can't have the most proactive and forward-looking policies and procedures, we lose out, and then the community loses out. So that's why we feel it's so important and why we work so closely with human resources to make sure that we have this in place.
Thank you. Another question here, I want to come right back to you. Not that I want to overwhelm you, but I think this is a question that you could answer. This is in regards to your East Campus, the East Hospital. Mm-hmm. And evidently this person feels that there's a stigma placed on that particular facility. And someone raised the question, why would you want to go to that facility in essence? Do you have any reactions to this, to that statement?
Yeah, so, you know, the history of East is it was a very different place when it was acquired by Ohio State and was integrated into the Wexner Medical Center. And it was viewed as this enormous opportunity for us to have a role on the east side of town and in that community, because it allowed us to not only deliver care, but also as a place to educate and train the next generation of clinician in terms of all the things that are so important to health and well-being. And I alluded to this before, but I'll be really specific. If you look at two measures of health, one is premature death, and the other is how a person rates their own health status, there are 5 determinants. Genetics being one, you know, the hand that I was dealt by my parents, that attributes to less than 10% of the chances of me living a full life expectancy and having good health. I mean, we used to teach it being about 50%. It's about 10. That's about it. There are environmental determinants of health, and that's getting a lot of attention lately. That's about 5. There are behavioral determinants of health. Do you choose to exercise, eat healthy? Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you use drugs? That's probably another 15. And then there is healthcare per se. Healthcare per se makes up 20%, believe it or not. I know it's a shocking number of someone's chances of living a full life and having a healthy life. The balance are the social determinants of health, right? Education, housing, transportation, food insecurity, and racism, among other things. Those are the things that are so important. So what does that have to do with being at Ohio East or being in the Near East Side? It is a place for us to leverage multiple determinants of health in that community. And I mentioned before the disparities between that community and the community next door to it, 1 mile away. So that was a huge opportunity. We have made enormous investments in Ohio State East. I was just at the ribbon cutting a couple of months ago, all wearing masks, for our new surgical center there, for our new wound center there. It is state of the art. It is as beautiful, to use a comparison on this campus, as the James, quite frankly, our newest inpatient facility. We are continuing with renovations there. We're working with the community at the former library to make that a place for community education. We have mobile vans that we send there to do everything from to do COVID testing, to education, to handing out masks and hand sanitizer to increase access to care. We are enormously proud of the commitment we're making and the presence, and I want to see that grow. We're not going to just sit back and congratulate ourselves. We want to have more and more of these investments. And at the same time, we're going to continue to make investments in the physical plant at East to modernize it, to make it as state of the art as we can, recognizing that this is an ongoing process that we need to embark on, and also recognize that more and more of the care is moving to the outpatient setting. One last thing, it's not a separate hospital from the other 6 hospitals at Wexner Medical Center. We have a single leadership team. We have programs that are joint. We've moved programs there like orthopedics to have that as their home, to avoid the, the haves and the have-nots scenario that all of us are very sensitive to. And we say that you'll get the same outstanding care there that you would get at any other of our hospital facilities at the Wexner Medical Center. It just depends on what kind of service you need. If you need cancer care, predominantly it's here on this campus. If you need orthopedic care, it could very well be over on that side of the campus. That's how we view this.
Thank you. Autumn, what are some best practices or techniques to start anti-racism conversations with your teams, particularly with those teams that may not be as diverse?
I think that's a great question, and we've given some examples. And I will say the Anti-Racism Action Plan website, while it lives on the Wexner Medical Center webpage, it's open to everyone. So I encourage you to check this out. But if you scroll to the bottom of that page, there is a whole list of resources of how to start conversations with your teams. I love that Dr. Gregoire talked a little bit about just listening and creating those opportunities. So we have seen, and a number of units and colleges are already the best management practices for this work. So reach out to colleagues in other departments and see what they're doing with their teams. But we've seen things like a team watching a film together and inviting a speaker. I helped a college invite Judge Laurel Beatty Blunt to speak to them after watching a film about the criminal justice system. Dean Gregoire and Dr. Moore talked a little bit about the value we have in having a Department of African and African American Studies and so many other disciplines around ethnic studies and social work and education. Tap into the expertise that is within our own university community to help your teams. But again, I've seen a variety of things that have included book clubs and watching a film as a team. And I would say that seems a little nerve-wracking to plan for some people because they reach out and they ask, but I think just take it one step at a time. The change in that experience is gonna happen at the unit level. So it doesn't have to be these forums and these focus groups. It could just be your team of 5 people or 12 people or 30 people really engaging in something together and exploring and bringing in a guest speaker. The beauty, again, I told you all, I think there's so many beautiful things about this year, is that it's easy to invite a guest to a Zoom meeting and have them accept. And so reach out to an expert. Again, so many scholars on our campus and in our Central Ohio community, but even abroad. We had someone in California join a lesson that we had at the health system around how voter engagement is important to health and how it helps to determine what happens in our community. And because it was virtual, we got her from California. So it just takes the initiative, I think, and talking with your team around what they would be interested in, but do it scared. Do it even if you're unsure. Everything may not land, it may not stretch people in the ways that you hoped, but do it anyway. And I would say you'll land among the stars truly. So both at the bottom of the Anti-Racism Action Plan website on the Medical Center's page, there are resources to conversation guides. Our team has really done a phenomenal job of grabbing things. Also, the Health Sciences Library at Pryor, they have a resource list, an anti-racism resource list on the library website as well. So check those things out. I'm always happy to be a thought partner. I know many of our ERG leaders are also happy to do that as well as you're trying to shape things, but I would say just start and keep going.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna direct this question to Bruce. We've had numerous conversations about it. This comes from the audience. We just received this question at 1:05. So with the organization being as large as it is, how do we ensure that we have the individuals necessary to facilitate our needed diversity and inclusion trainings? And this person is saying too often staff and other positions are tagged to facilitate trainings and still have to complete the other work.
Yeah, James, as you point out, you and I have had conversations, and we actually have a conversation in progress. You're waiting for me to actually respond to you. For a moment, I thought maybe you had changed the name on your screen and put that question in there, but I'll let that one go past. It is a really important question, and I think many of us on this session are responsible, in fact, for the answer to that question. Not only is it a big, complex place in terms of the need, it's a big, complex place in terms of who is available and qualified to do this delivery. We just had an initial meeting yesterday with interim executive director Beverly Vandiver on the Kirwan Institute with our executive advisory group that has just stood up and formed. Gretchen Ritter, the executive dean of arts and sciences, is chairing that group. And so, that's a team that has had not only expertise in evidence-based approaches and developing the evidence, but also in many cases in training. James, your office has had a lot of responsibility for this. HR throughout the university, including the Western Medical Center, has capacity here. Outreach and engagement has been involved in some of these issues. Many of the colleges, and we talked about AAAS in arts and sciences, but there are a number of departments across the university and many different colleges that have subject matter expertise and have engaged as part of their outreach missions. In fact, Student Life is extraordinarily engaged in these kinds of training. And so, part of the question is responding to the request for immediate needs when we see demonstrable gaps. And we happen to be at a time where there is a lot of need for training. This has become, over the past 6 months, just the topic that everyone sees suddenly. It's not a new topic, but we see it, okay? And so there is a lot of expectation and demand. And then the other piece of the question is actually in how do we effectively mobilize all of those distributed resources in a complex environment? Is there some sort of convening that we need to do of the people with the capacity to offer those sorts of resources to make sure that we're actually hitting the highest priority needs for learning within our community? And so that's part of the answer to the broader question.
Hey, James, if I could add on, again, back to the training, just because I think it is just so incredibly important, but to the points that Autumn made earlier, there are just incredible resources available. Human Resources has an incredible gateway to learning that has been developed that has all kinds of training and opportunities that are available there that are self-directed. Not every training needs to be led by an instructor. There's just so many opportunities to read and gain knowledge. I know myself personally, I have someone in this space that I follow on LinkedIn. Some of you may be familiar with him because he's considered one of the world's leading racial equity experts, and that's Sean Harper. James, you may know Sean. Right now he's a tenured professor at the University of Southern California in their Marshall School of Business, and he leads their Race and Equity Center. He's got some amazing training and information out there, and actually he and the diversity and inclusion director from Zoom actually partnered together this year and did a Time Magazine Zoom series. There's 9 sessions, they're free. It's excellent material, and it's out there for public consumption. And it talks about all the things we're talking about today, around, having conversations about race in the workplace. How do we advance professionals of color in the workplace? How do we deal with workplace tension around these things? I mean, some really practical tips on how to navigate this space. And so stuff is out there, you can find it. And again, there's a lot of stuff that we have that's available, and certainly Autumn referenced all the things that they're doing and that they have available. Take advantage of it.
Well, I'm gonna give you 30 seconds, closing remarks. You got 30 seconds. We'll start with Tom first.
I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank everybody for just being willing to try something new. It's okay to fail. We learn. When it's okay to fail, we take more risks. When it's okay to fail, we learn more. So thanks for, as I said at the beginning, this was the best use of an hour and a half of your time. I agree with you.
Autumn.
I would say I'm always inspired and impressed by my colleagues in this work. And over the last 6 months, I've really seen people share their time and their talent. And I think USAC, don't let up, don't get your foot off the gas and asking questions about how we resource this work, because it is a tax on people. I'm just like you, and I saw some of the questions in the box that we do this in addition to other responsibilities. And so time and talent is important, but so are resources. And so we'll continue to evaluate as Dr. McFerrin and Susan Basso have shared. There are resources that exist, but really looking closely at what else we actually do need. Because again, as I said before, if we had it already, we wouldn't be in this place now, but I do feel very optimistic about where we're going.
Bruce.
I'm proud of the fact that our community feels comfortable challenging us to think differently, feels comfortable challenging us when they don't think we're delivering on the things that we've talked about. We've made it very clear how much we understand that it's a journey, but that doesn't mean you don't check in at the way stations along that journey. We can't simply say that, you know, we're going to get there. We need to say we're going to get there. We need to mean it, but we also need to set those goals that demonstrate that as we're moving along, we really are being attentive and making progress, and we can show one another how we're making progress. That's best accomplished by the kind of environment that we saw today, people coming to learn, but also coming to be willing to say, I think you're missing this, or I don't understand how you're delivering this. We need that as leaders, and I'm grateful that this community is willing to do that.
Thank you. Susan.
Thanks, James. I guess I would just underscore what I heard all of my colleagues say today. I think we're at an incredible moment in time that we can actually move talk to action. I think that's probably the most important message. I know I've been engaged in these conversations and this work for a very long time. And for some reason, it's different. It feels different. I think we have just an incredible opportunity to really make some meaningful change.
Harold, last but not least.
Thank you. You know, as a nation and as people, we're challenged by an economic situation that is really difficult. We're challenged by a pandemic that is incredible and you know, once in a century. We're challenged by climate in ways that we're only beginning to understand, and we're continuously challenged by structural racism. And we have an opportunity to do something about all of them, but we particularly have an opportunity here today to do something about the issue of racism and figuring out ways that we can work together as a nation and as a society and as human beings. If we can't do that, we leave a legacy for our children that I believe is really going to be untenable. The challenges we have today will only be worse. We have to stand up now and take action, because quite frankly, if we don't, who will? And it's encouraging to me, and it's actually delightful to see that we could come together for an hour and a half today to have this conversation and agree that it doesn't end with a conversation here today. This is just the beginning of a long-term process to move our university and our communities forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much. On behalf of USAC and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, I want to thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedule to spend time with us. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to working with you to continue to create a world-class institution. You all enjoy the rest of your day. We tell all our USAC followers, continue to do good work, and we are here to support you in all your endeavors. We're not quite where we want to be, but we know we can get where we want to be. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.